Matt, let's stand up for the invocation of the pledge. Bow your heads, please. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this day that you've given to us. Father, we come to you in troubled times. And you know everything is in the past and to become to us in the future. And we just rely on you, Father, for your blessings. We ask, Father, you continue to be with the men and women of armed forces that serve overseas and at home, especially in these trying times, Father, our first responders, that they're out doing the business to help and save lives. We ask also, Father, that we just take a moment of silence. We've lost a couple of people in our county, Father, that through tragic death, and we'd just like to take a moment of silence for that. Also, Father, we just would like to have you be with the rest of this meeting and the proceedings. For it's in his name we pray, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, born and unborn.
Thank you. Any additions or deletions to the agenda?
So, George, if we can move an update on the coronavirus one, and then keep the audit report K2, but then the airport review.
And make K3, K4. Move approval of the agenda as amended.
Support.
Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Consent calendar. Board minutes, communications, recommendations from committees.
Move to accept the consent calendar.
Support.
Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Administrators report.
Mr. Chair, I'll do the coronavirus report along with Dan Morton. I'll have that be my administrator's report, given that I've done a little else recently.
Very good. All right. Committee reports. Chuck?
Let's see, I went to Pine River Township meeting. You know, they have interest in the airport situation that they're waiting to hear on. And then Seville Township did get a letter back from the state. It has a lot in it. I spoke with Senator Outman on it. He feels the township should take it on one step at a time. They want to come and verify that there's no pollution, and then there's a lot of stipulations that every rural community in the state of Michigan has. So I think they're just going to fight it one thing at a time. It surprised Senator Outman that the state came back with as much as they did. But I think they'll prove that there is no pollution anymore, and hopefully things can get worked out on that.
I attended the Elma City Council meeting. Probably the big discussion there are questions on the Second Amendment resolution. They had read the article in the paper, and there's one question as, just why are we doing it? And I explained it was, a citizen group that had come to us. Tony Costanza, who, the Elma has their city attorney attend their meetings, and he opined that that we can't do that. We can't create a sanctuary because we don't have the authority to do that, which we kind of knew. And also kind of raised questions about liability issues. And then I explained that we're working on a different version of the resolution.
And I forgot to mention, I sent something to rewritten to you, Tracy, I think you guys, so something that
I
they want.
don't remember seeing it, but I've seen a lot of email in the last few days.
Right.
So they've got something back they want to work with.
All right.
Guys.
Okay, good, good. Anything else?
Nope.
Yeah.
A couple townships talked a little bit about the Second Amendment thing. We discussed that. I told them my position on it at the time. And really last night, Fulton Township Zoning Board passed the resolution to take it to the full board on Thursday for this new building that's going to be constructed on 57. So I think that's going to get wrapped up here tomorrow, Thursday night.
Very good.
That'll be put in there.
Jen?
I had a meeting with mobile medical response, and I've got to turn that into the clerk's office. I just now remembered it, so I apologize for that. But anyway, the response times are still really good. One of the things that they brought up through the whole state of Michigan, there's only very few that keep track of the response times, and we are one of those that do that. So, and they're always very good. They're always looking to improve, but it depends on the time of the year. And one of the good things about our county is that it's easy to get around because all the roads or streets and roads go east and west, north and south. There's not a lot of, going curved over to, like having to stop and pick it up someplace else. Is that right, Dan?
Rainbow Lake.
Yeah, Rainbow Lake's a little challenging. So anyway, that would be it.
I attended the Ithaca City Council meeting along with an Upstart Township meeting. And from Friday on, I can't tell you how many hours we spent in the EOC meetings. If you don't know it, folks, you've got a great group of individuals working for you. Our emergency management, Dan and Mike, the new emergency manager, he hit the ground running. He wasn't supposed to start working until Monday. He started working Friday. And then Tracy, she hung in there all weekend. The EOC, I was in and out. But I say you got a great, just trust me, you got a great group of individuals. They're very professional. I was in a meeting yesterday up in the circuit court because we couldn't get everybody in this room. And it was a staff meeting, and Marcus Cheatham was there. And one of his remarks was, he says, you know what? Of course, you got to remember, Marcus is the Board of Health Director for the Regional Board of Health, which includes Clinton and Montcalm County. And he said, and he even said, the emergency management team, along with the administrator, are so far ahead of all the other counties and what we're doing and how we're proceeding things. So that had to make me feel pretty good because we're doing the right thing. So that being said, okay, let's go on. Consideration of new business. Coronavirus update.
An example of what I'm hearing many of you say, and it's a mantra I have liked. From Marcus's comment, in Gratiot County, we want to be leaders, not followers. And so I appreciated his comment simply because it honors our objective to be leaders and not followers. There's been a lot going on. And the really interesting part and the challenge is that everything with this changes day to day from hour to hour. So we've been trying to balance our response. How do we give people updated information, but not seem like we're changing all the time and we just don't know what we're talking about? So there's as much art as there is science to all of that. Of course, the herd of the COVID-19 has been out there for a while, but it really came to our doorstep last week when we heard the report that there was a case in Montcalm County, right at our doorstep. And of course, folks travel between these counties every single day and all over the state, but it's right there at our door once it hits Montcalm County. So, because of the shortage of testing kits, it's believed that there are likely many, many more cases out there than we are aware of now. As of yesterday, I don't have today's numbers. As of yesterday, there were 53 cases in the state of Michigan. More now, but in the southeast corner of the state, certainly. But it was also over in Ottawa County, Kent County, and Montcalm. So it's not just over there. So these are some things we've been doing. Sort of in order and mostly. I have instructed cleaning staff to do enhanced cleaning. That means doorknobs, conference tables, chairs, rails, grab bars, your workbenches there. Each one of these chair bars handles was cleaned before you came in this room tonight, and they'll be cleaned again first thing in the morning. The circuit court on the 4th floor, the seating area, the rails, everything that people touch, they were cleaned today before this meeting. They'll be cleaned again first thing in the morning. So when we talk about enhanced cleaning, that's the sort of thing that we're talking about. I sent a message. Communication is so critical. I sent a message to staff late last week describing the preventative measures we can all take. This is the wash your hands until they fall off. It's the sneeze, cough into your elbow. Don't shake hands. Stay home if you're sick. Send other people home if they arrive sick. And yes, there's this spacing issue. We have new space tonight, in part because that's what we're instructed to do. And if the smart people tell us what to do, we're not going to think we're smarter and we're going to do it. It also, as leaders, I'm doing everything I can to model exactly what I'm saying that we're ought to be doing. So take pictures away, or just take them, show them what we're doing over here, Rosemary. So, and we went to the circuit court courtroom for the department heads meeting yesterday because we could not do safe spacing. So we took folks upstairs. George issued a declaration of local state of emergency on Sunday. It took effect yesterday. This declaration allows us to at least do an attempt to recoup costs associated with our response to the virus. We attached recommendations to the declaration, things like, please do this preventative stuff, cancel non-essential meetings, safe spacing, all of the things. This is on the website. Everything, we're deciding what to put up on the website and what not, but certainly this declaration and the attached recommendations are there. We've been considering what county business needs to continue and what can be delayed. For example, we have canceled meetings of the Board of Determination and the Drain Office, the Veterans Advisory Group, the Parks Advisory Committee. We canceled, also Central Dispatch Authority meeting has been canceled, and of course many meetings in the community, not just county meetings, have been canceled as well. And we've also canceled a meeting that had previously been set with city managers to discuss future parks funding. That I'm just not remembering now, which we can get the gist of it. I've instructed staff to cancel all non-essential appointments and to handle all business by telephone that they possibly can. We've taken particular care in communicating this information as widely but as responsibly as possible. A press release went out on Sunday. I've sent emails to staff as things develop. I've met with all department heads, and George attended that meeting with us. That was yesterday. All of, I said department heads and elected officials, all of the judges attended also. And I met today with our local union representatives. A growing number of government entities are closing their offices to the public, and our staff are hearing that and beginning to wonder why we aren't. We're not yet choosing to take this step. We're constantly monitoring developments and again trying to balance continuing service to the members of our community while also keeping everyone safe. So we're doing this minute by minute. But we are taking steps as they seem prudent. Something I worry about a great deal is misinformation that is out there, which is why we are so trying to communicate with our staff. And I've told our staff, if you don't know the answer, say so. No rumor mongering, no story talk, no I heard this or that. We are all leaders, and we must communicate from leaders. And something that I hadn't indicated, and you brought the thought to mind, Jan, but how long does the virus last on surfaces? Well, it lasts up to 24 hours on cardboard, up to 2 or 3 days on plastic and stainless steel. Aerosols, it can last out there up to 3 hours. Now, all of those results are in the lab. That might not be exactly the way that works out in the world, but it gives you a pretty good guideline. It's not 7 days or 9 days or something that you may be doing. So we've been also saying over and over and over to our staff, we're telling you what's going to go on locally, but for information about this virus, we are not the experts. So we're telling everyone we possibly can about the website, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, Michigan Gov. The governor's got a lot of stuff up there, and her office has been very active, including the executive order issued yesterday that closed a lot of our businesses. And also our local mental health department, our health department, the Michigan District Health Department, has a great deal of information on their website as well. So keep yourselves informed. Keep yourselves informed. The declaration that George issued on Sunday, that was done pursuant to his authority under MCL 30.410, section 10, paragraph B. But that declaration is in effect for 7 days unless this board renews it for a period beyond the 7 days, or continues it, continues it. And has to be done with the consent of this governing body. And certainly we know from everything we're reading that the need to act to prevent and to fight the impacts of this virus in the community is certainly going to extend well beyond 7 days. So I am therefore asking this board to move and pass an extension of this declaration until further notice. So the statute says it's only in effect for 7 days. I'm going to ask this board, because the statute allows, with your support, to extend the effect of this local declaration of emergency to beyond 7 days. So I'm asking you to do so, and to make it in effect until further notice. I think I said that in a very confusing way, not once but twice, but hopefully you've gotten it.
So moved.
Support. Moved and supported. Is there any discussion?
Until further notice, who would give notice, Tracy?
That would be done at the EOC, George, Danny, and then what we would do is we would draft a new declaration, rescinding the declaration, but that would be.
We would take our direction, obviously, from the president, from the governor.
But because we, if I believe, if I'm right, because we made the authorization, if we as a board of commissioners felt at some point we didn't want it anymore, power gets to George's head and he starts, making us call him Sir George or something like that. We can end that.
This is a serious question.
So we do have the ability to,
Stop it at any.
the board giveth, the board taketh away.
But we would follow our cues, obviously, from the governor's.
Absolutely.
George, about the only thing that I would recommend if you want to put a firm deadline on it would be to not exceed what the state's declaration of emergency is.
I think we can handle it.
And I believe the state's is indefinite because I had that same question.
The state hasn't put it in there.
Yeah. So.
Any other questions? Hearing none. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
I think you should do a roll call on that.
Certainly.
Just making the. Hear me, Angie?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
Pick up over there.
No, sorry.
You reach over and shake Angie.
Okay,
Lift her up.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Bunting,
Yes.
Commissioner Lambert,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy.
Yes.
Commissioner Bailey.
Yes. Okay.
One more question, Tracy. Where did your information on how long it is going to stay on surfaces? What CDCC?
There were, the one that I pulled off and printed is from because I kind of anticipated that question. I wanted to know. It's from Wired. However, I looked at 4 articles and they all read the same. This is just the one I chose to print out.
Okay.
It was just a Google, Dr. Google.
Right. Very good. We're in this for the long haul, so this could be a while, but hopefully only be a few weeks and we'll be back to normal. But This is our new normal right now. Okay, thank you very much, board. Continue on. We've got, like, yo-yo.
All right, so the protocol for this, usually I stand up there.
Well, I know that's gonna be a little hard for you, but you can do it from there. You can sit down, it's fine.
I'm gonna sit
You
here.
can sit there, it's fine.
Is there anything that we'd want to see through the books as you're talking? Or are you going to put this on the,
I was just gonna ask Chris if they
Matt said he did have the presentation and he would be able to tell.
Matt, can you put that up, the audit?
Yep, let me get that up for you.
Got about 4 things that he's making.
Yeah,
could I get, I'd like to follow along in the book in case I have a question.
they're in piles over here.
Okay,
You just want to pick one up.
There's also a
George,
thanks, Dan.
Sorry.
yeah, I've got the one in my packet, but I wondered if there was something more than that.
No, I'm gonna go through one.
Oh, yeah, okay, because I got that right here.
Okay.
No, I thought there was a little bit more. in that. Okay, you're not gonna, okay.
Okay.
before we get started, George, did we ask for public comment under G? I just don't
You
know.
know, I don't think we did.
Yeah, so we probably should do that.
But before we go any farther, sorry, Ally. Like I say, there's so many things on our mind.
Right.
I did ask for public comment and I should have. So I'm already knocked off the circuit. After we get through the audit, I will ask for public comment because otherwise it's just so much. Please bear with us.
Kelly, whatever you're presenting, you have extra copies of, so those are. There you go. Take that one, some sort.
It'll also be up with the
Okay.
Okay.
And this is in the board packet, so
Yeah.
you can pull this.
And
now.
Jan has one.
I'm assuming whoever's on the other end of the screen is gonna go through the slide, as I know.
Think.
We're on the next slide.
Matt, move the finance statement section. Matt,
Just say change slide when you need that to change the slide. Does that work for you, Matt?
I can do that. There should be a slide advancer up at the podium too, but if you guys want to just let me know.
oh, we can change the slide?
All right.
Was it disinfected?
Just don't put it in your mouth.
If there's a button.
Wash your hands when you go.
There you go, we're all set.
I
Thanks,
can
man.
change my own slide now. So that's efficient again.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
All right, well, thank you very much for having me this afternoon to go through the annual audit. Probably the farthest thing from your mind, but still important information here. So as a part of our auditing procedures, we issued audit opinions. The county received unmodified or clean audit opinions this year related to both internal controls and to the financial statements themselves. That's within your statements, I always like to point this out for you. Throughout the year, you are presented information for the general fund, which looks a little bit different from the general fund that we report in the financial statements. So within your audited statements, based on the accounting rules, we have to do an evaluation of all your funds. Based on some criteria, certain funds are not allowed to be reported by themselves. They are to be brought under general fund, basically. So I provide you here with a list of the other funds activities that are included with what you might call your regular a couple of high-level kind of non-fund items I wanted to bring to your attention. This year in your governmental activities, there were additions to capital assets of about $468,000. So a significant amount of money going in to replace or refurbish assets that you have on hand. A couple of examples, Commission on Aging roof was redone. There were several pieces of equipment purchased and several vehicles purchased this year. Wow. To give you an idea, currently you're depreciating or using up the dollar value of assets at roughly $407,000. So this year you've actually replaced more than you depreciated. We don't spend a lot of time talking about your component units, but the drainage district is pretty large for Gratiot County. And I'd like to touch on the amount of debt that's outstanding in this area. So for this fiscal year, there was about 1.9 million in new debt issued in drain bonds and notes. And there was debt repayment of about 2.34 million. So this is the first time in several years where the drainage district has actually paid back more on their bonds and notes outstanding than what they paid down. So outstanding debt then at the end of fiscal year 19 was about 14.1 million. All right, we'll spend some time talking about the general fund then. The revenue from 2019 to 2018 fiscal years there in the most significant categories of revenue that you receive. So obviously the most significant being property taxes. Other than property taxes, your other categories of revenue stayed relatively consistent. You'll see that taxes did decrease this year. That is related to timing of when property tax dollars were received. So you had a local unit that had some issues in remitting tax payments to the county, and because of the delay in that time, some of those dollars aren't recorded as revenue. So it's not that you're not going to get those dollars, it's that there's a timing difference and they'll be recorded as revenue in your current fiscal year.
That looks about $500,000 or $600,000.
I think it was more than that.
Here you can see general fund revenues over the past 5 years, relatively consistent. A few ups and downs there, but consistent for the most part. Again, you'll see from 18 to 19, it decreased slightly. I would anticipate, as long as timing for that one unit is better and others remain consistent, that bar should. On the expenditure side, here you can see.
Like, can I stop you just for a second? Back on the revenue comparison. So if they pay it in this year, so then, and if they pay next year's in this year, we'll show double in that. We'll show a bump that we really didn't have. I mean, we have the cash, but we got 2 payments in 1 year. That's how that'll look next year.
Because there's something called it's called the 60-day rule. So if there's an entity that owes you money,
right,
you have a receivable. But because of the 60-day rule, if you don't actually collect that cash, you have to defer the revenue until the time that you receive cash. So that's what's happening with it.
So it's really kind of a cash accounting type of thing, though. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, so the most significant expenditure category is going to be your general government, followed by public safety. You'll see that general government increased this year, and it's over $7 million. Majority of that increase is $800,000 that was borrowed it from delinquent tax revolving fund, and then you paid that to the drain, paid down the county's portion of drain debt that's outstanding. Okay, so it's that, some people think that doesn't end up being an expenditure, but it is an expenditure, and then it sits in your liability account until you pay that cash back to your delinquent tax revolving fund. Then your transfer out category is the other one that had more significant change for the year. That was also up. This year there was about $750,000 that was transferred out of general fund in order to establish the OPEB trust. So expenditures over the past 5 years then, again, relatively consistent from year to year. This year we have 2 larger items. This chart just shows the $800,000. Okay, here we can see for the past 5 years when your general fund revenues exceeded expenditures or vice versa. So your revenues did exceed expenditures. So in those years you were adding back to fund balance. And then in this particular year, you actually had expenditures that exceeded. See that up from 17 to 18, and then this year you used up about 1.1 million in fund balance on those 2 larger projects that I previously mentioned. You'll notice that the majority of your fund balance in the general fund is unassigned. There's a small portion that's assigned, committed, and restricted. But fortunately, most of your dollars in general fund are available for your use for general fund operations.
And then Alex, excuse me, on the previous slide, because that's normally kind of a disturbing trend where your expenditures, cross over your revenues. But again, that's a function of the one local unit of government who essentially paid late, right? In terms of.
Yes, yep. That is, and the fact that you were actually planning to use up some of your fund balance on specific projects. So yes, not a trend you want to see indefinitely, but especially if you have those larger projects where you need to be spending some money, you're going to have years where these lines. Moving away from general fund, I'll talk about those tax quickly. You'll see I put a note at the bottom of this slide for you. So in the past, the tax fee and sale proceeds fund was reported separately in your financial statements, and really under the laws out there, this fund should be reported with delinquent tax revolving fund. So we kind of cleaned up that area of your financial statements and have reported these funds together now. So that's why you're going to see your net position increased pretty significantly there, and then your cash investments increased slightly, but not as much as the total. So overall, your delinquent tax revolving fund is very healthy, about $7 million in net position, and your cash and investments is at over $4 million. So if you're fortunate to be in a position where you're not borrowing at the time that the county needs to buy the local property taxes, because you've kept that cash on hand and maintained a healthy fund balance there. All right, quick look at your long-term obligations here. So the first category being your bonds. There were no new bonds this year, only payments. So the outstanding amount decreased. In your fiscal year you're currently in, you will pay off the 2011 bond. So done with that one. Compensated absences remain relatively consistent with the prior year. There was a new capital lease this year for various printing and copying equipment. So that's a new category without an amount in the prior year. And then we get to the payroll related items. So we have the net pension liability, which is again a liability this year. And previous year, you can report it an asset. However, annually, when they do the calculation for the liability, there's an interest portion that they calculate. They call it interest on net pension liability, or total pension liability. What they call it. And this year that amount was about $1 million. So they calculate that every year, and that increases your liability. At the time that the actuary happens, happened to be not a great time in the market, and so some of your assets have left their market values, and so those two items combined together cause this to flip from a net pension asset to a net pension liability. And then the last category is the other post-employment benefits, call it OPEB. So this is the health healthcare benefit for retirees that exists. Previously, you'll see that the liability was more significant. It was over $4 million. However, you did establish a trust and you funded about $1.25 million into that trust this year. And so the liability decreased. You also had some other favorable things happen in your actuary. Some of the assumptions that are used, some of the experience differences that they calculate. And so that decreased the liability all on its own, and then you also funded it. So that's why it's changed there. All right. So not only are we doing the financial statement audit, but we also do an audit of federal funds. As a part of that audit, we have to determine what is a major program or sometimes programs, depending on risk and how much funding is going through the county. This year we tested the child support enforcement program. This is the one we typically tested, and we had no federal or financial program. So everything was looked at, All right, we'll talk about internal control deficiencies. This year there was one material weakness. It was related to the recording of the special assessment receivable. This is an improvement. There's still a material weakness. This is still an improvement in the county's overall system. If you remember back to prior year audits, we would have a material weakness for journal entries, financial statement preparation, things that are much more robust and involve many different areas of accounting. So this year we're down to basically one journal entry that wasn't caught, that was incorrect. So we had discussed with management ways to go about rectifying that issue, making sure that the support that's used to come up with an entry makes its way to the finance department so that they can properly review it, have that second set of eyes on the information, and so they feel like, yep, they know that entry was recorded. All right. We also include a governance letter, which Chris, did that get posted in there? Okay, so you will be getting the governance letter, or should you choose to pick up one of the bound copies, the thickest annual financial statement bound copy. This letter is in the back. I'm just going to touch on a few items within it, but it's okay that you don't have it in front of you. But when you do come to that point in time, this is what it looks like. Just a few issues that I like to point out. The financial statements do contain some amount of estimation in them. The first being the capital assets and the useful lives that are assigned to those. Depending on the useful lives assigned, that changes what depreciation expense will look like in your county-wide financial statements. And then the other two largest areas of estimation are going to be that net pension liability and the hometown liability. So they are the result of actuary reports, which contain several estimates, and then how the changes between years are allocated in your financial statements are also estimated. We do not see any issues though with the estimates that was no bias from our part of the list. You will have coming up in the fiscal year that you are currently in, you'll have to implement something called GASB 4. So this is going to take a look at funds that used to be more custodial in nature and deciding whether or not they should still be reported that way, or if the activity in some of those funds or some of those accounts needs to be converted over to a different one. So the finance department will be working on that. That may result in some different reporting that you see at some point. Okay, and then you'll there's an appendix 2 included in that letter that does contain some management comments. This list is shorter than the previous year. There are some repeat comments in a matter of time. I think the finance department did an excellent job of addressing the major issues that we saw in the previous audit and really addressing the findings. And so now they're down to a shorter list of here are some things that would be more best practice like for you to look at. Questions for me?
Questions, any comments?
I think once we look at our books, go through that, we might have questions. I might.
Yep, I'm available anytime if you need to call me.
Okay, thanks.
I've got a question, and this is great. This is much better. Our team's making great progress. I'm just curious. So I'm sounding kind of bitter, but so we had one special assessment receivable that was wrong and we got a material weakness for that. Is that?
It's because it was a $1.4 million adjustment.
Okay.
And so the dollar amount was material.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for clarifying, because I'm thinking,
Normally one entry.
right, because we do bazillion entries.
It's because
1 point, all right. Yep, so, yeah, thank you.
Did we get a corrective action on that and it's taken care of?
And that was something that you guys caught? Yeah, okay. And when you talk about estimates, is there any way to firm that number up better? When you said we had some estimates in some of these accounting, is there any way for us to firm that number up, or is that just, it's gotta be some type of estimate?
it's just.
The nature of the beast, because we have actuarials, and you know what actuarials do.
And I'm assuming, there's standard depreciation schedules for vehicles and for equipment, and so we're using those, right? But, or are we not always?
No, you're within what your policy is and what general years look like.
Okay.
But, you have a vehicle that might last 5 years or it might last 10 years.
Right.
You don't know, so
right.
What you are using is a reasonable.
So when we buy a vehicle, you're depreciating that out instead of just taking it off the year? You don't take it all off the year?
So within, let's say, general fund purchased a vehicle. Within general fund, that amount is expensed all in that year. But then we have to go from your fund statements to what we call your government-wide statements. That's where your equipment, your land, your buildings, all of that is recorded. And so when we go from the fund statement where it's an expense, we go to the government-wide statement, we take it out of expense and make it an asset, and then we depreciate it.
Gotcha.
So what you see on more of a regular basis, it is expensed within those.
I see.
It's confusing.
Well, it's different than like tax accounting, because we've got assets probably that on a standard depreciation schedule are zero, but they're still assets. So it's not, I guess, it's just a different way of thinking about it. Yeah, it's a different way of thinking about. Glad you're doing it.
I grew up years ago trying to justify that stuff. Not like a regular,
Right. It's
okay. Anything else? All right. Alan, appreciate you being here.
Thank you for coming.
And we're not gonna make you say.
Get out of here, wash your hands.
I'm glad it's getting better.
Yeah, it is.
That's sweet, it's
Good job.
Long way.
This crew and everybody, the treasurer's office.
Okay. Matt? There you go. Would you go ahead and get Stephanie Ward on the line for us?
Yep, I believe
Got
Stephanie.
to ask him, somebody wants to speak.
Public comment.
I'm gonna do that.
Oh, okay.
While she's getting her on the line, I'm going back to public comment. I'm just trying to kill two birds here. So in the meantime, if anybody's got any comment to make, other than the airport, we're gonna make a lot of comments here in a minute. So that's taking a public comment on that. But if anybody else has anything else to speak to, you're more than welcome to do it this time. In this room, anybody up in the circuit court? Nothing? Somebody? Okay, we'll just wait for Stephanie. Stephanie will be coming on.
I'm here.
Oh, there she is. John, just by phone?
Yep, she's just by phone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hi, George.
Oh, hi, Steph. Okay. I've got Stephanie here tonight. Several members of associations, pilot associations, airport people. You all wanted an update. I felt the best way to give you an update was to have Stephanie come on and talk to it. And then after she's done, we can post the questions if you've got any. But I would just go ahead, Stephanie, and if you would like to just go right into reporting what you've got so far for us.
I could do that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I apologize for not being able to be in there in person. Our company has put us on a essential travel only, which pretty much means we're allowed to go back and forth to the office and really not to any public meetings or anything. So apologize for not being there in person. This project, I tell you, has been a challenge for us. From the initial conversations between us with Tracy and George, even trying to scope the project, and that you have posed some interesting questions to us to evaluate for the airport. There's basically 4 areas that we were asked to take a look at, one being ways to increase the efficiency of the way the airport operates, if there's ways to potentially increase revenues, what some management improvements might be, suggestions we have for that, and then also the issue of the potential closure of the airport. And the closure issue being what would be some of the ramifications or concerns affiliated with that. So the closure issue is kind of, I think if you don't mind, I'll tackle that one first, because I believe that's kind of a standalone element, and then has some fairly definitive responses associated with that. And then the other 3 really are more challenging, because some of the ways that we could increase efficiency might require some additional funds. Some of the management might affect the efficiency or the revenue. So those 3, as I'll touch on a few items here in a moment, are much more intertwined together. And so this opportunity to have the conversation with you, I think, is beneficial. We have not prepared a final report yet. The conversation that Tracy and I had was that this would be a good opportunity for us to highlight a few of our findings at this point, get a little direction from you if there's specific things you'd like us to delve a little deeper into. Otherwise, where we've sat right now is that we've got a few different scenarios that we've identified that might be ways that you could look at it. And we've also compared you in a few instances to a couple of your peers to give you some basis. I'm not going to go into that in detail today, just because it's a lot of figures that would be better presented in person so that you could see it as we discuss it. So I'll just hit some highlights today. Starting with the closure element, and I'll try to make some pauses, that way if you've got questions you can jump in at any point. I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. The closure issue. That is one that, quite honestly, I wish I kind of had a couple bucks every time an airport asks us about that issue, because it seems to be a fairly consistent topic across the country. And quite honestly, the answer is fairly easy in that in my 20 plus years of doing airport planning, there's really only been one airport that I'm aware of that is fairly heavily federally funded, that has ever been agreed to be closed, and that is out in California. And that was agreed to 5 years ago, and they're still in the process of trying to figure out what that looks like. So as a general rule, once you're a federally obligated airport, which Gratiot Community Airport is, you're kind of on the hook. All the property that was purchased back in the 60s when the airport was relocated to the current site was all done with federal grants. And so that means that you're federally obligated. And then as you continue to do projects either using your non-primary entitlement dollars, that's the $150,000 a year that the airport is eligible for because you are a federally obligated airport and federally eligible airport. Every time you take and use those funds, that kind of continues to reset the clock. So you really have two clocks that are actively running, if you will. One is one that it acts in perpetuity because of using federal dollars to buy the airport property. So that's kind of a separate clock that's related. You can go through a process that's called a land release to have some of that property released from aeronautical purposes to something else. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But so that's kind of one column, if you can think about that. And then there's the other dollars that have been used to bring projects to the airport. And that clock resets with each individual project that you undertake. So for example, if you utilized federal funds for a crack sealing or a paint marking project, that has a shorter time frame affiliated with it because it's tied to the lifespan of the project. So, you know, a typical crack sealing is eligible about every 3 years. So if you only did crack sealing projects, then you would reset that clock every 3 years every time you take a grant. If you do a project such as a runway rehabilitation where you go out and you take off the surface of the runway, put new asphalt down on top of it, that typically has a 15 to 20 year lifespan that is expected for it. So that resets the clock on that project for 20 years. So all these different projects play into the requirement to continue to keep the airport open, number one, and maintain it in a safe environment. So if you were interested in getting out of the airport business, you would, one, have to stop taking federal funds such that those clocks stop resetting, but still maintain the airport in an operational condition. So the crack sealing, the paint marking, the tree removal for clear approaches, any of that would then fall on the county or the airport authority's responsibility to maintain without those federal funds, to get you to a point where the project clocks stop running. And then you would have to then go to the FAA and prove that there's no need for the airport to maintain itself as an airport. So you'd have to demonstrate things like, where can the 40+ based aircraft that you have go? Where, you know, is there enough capacity in the system, in the surrounding airport infrastructure to absorb those aircraft? You'd have to then demonstrate through a environmental assessment that whatever you would reuse the airport property for would not be something that would be adverse to the local community. And so there's a number of additional elements that you would have to march through to make that request, get that approval from the FAA. And then the dollar standpoint comes into it, is that they may look at some of the projects and ask for payments back on those. So if you hadn't exhausted the time clock yet, or even if you have exhausted the time clock, but they've come out as the runway, for example, you may have exhausted your 20-year commitment on the actual dollars spent to rehabilitate the runway, but you may not have exhausted the time frame for it still being usable, in which case the FAA does a economic impact review to figure out what's the value of the assets still on the field, as well as the value of the assets for the property itself to transition. And so those dollar amounts then need to be repaid back to the FAA because federal dollars were used for those projects. So that's something that, you know, is a bit of a nebulous number right now because, you know, trying to figure out, well, what would the airport be in terms of a highest and best use? Because of the lack of utilities out there, you know, I'm guessing it would be some fairly minimal industrial development, maybe probably more likely the agricultural uses that are being done on a lot of the existing open property today. So the process for that is, you know, pretty lengthy. We just went through that with an airport down in southeastern Michigan, looking at the potential closure between the environmental review that we had to do, the evaluation. We spent probably close to $500,000 just trying to evaluate, would we want to close it? And it was determined by the local community that it was way more costly to try to close it than it was just to kind of deal with what they've got and move forward. So So from that perspective, I really don't see that that's really an option that is probably something that the county is interested in. I know that there was some questions about what happens should any of the members of the current authority be interested in leaving the authority. As that relates to it, you know, the FAA's perspective is they're just looking for a public owner for the airport. They really don't care if it's a single entity, being Gratiot County, the city of Elma as you know, the previous owner, or if it's an authority. That's up to you as the local sponsor to determine. What they're going to look for, though, is that you are a public entity, or the group has a public entity to control it. In terms of different entities, either the townships or the city possibly looking to remove themselves from the authority, that's really a byproduct of your bylaws, of, you know, what you allow to do. I'll tell you that I know that, you know, there's been some question about the liability aspects of it. The example I would give you is that we recently did a project in Jackson County, picking up their primary runway and rotating it 10 degrees. In doing so, what we identified was that there is a former landfill on the Jackson County airport. The airport is currently owned and operated by the city, or by the county of Jackson, but the airport was previously owned and operated by the city of Jackson. And that was an important distinguishing factor, because as we looked at where we were going to put our new runway, one of the major obstacles for us was a former city-owned and operated landfill. What we found is that there was some contamination affiliated with that landfill. And so because we were able to document that the contamination occurred because of the landfill occurred on the airport because during the city's tenure, that responsibility and liability ultimately then went back to the city to assist us with cleanup and mitigation measures. So, you know, looking at your existing airport authority configuration, and if entities were looking to remove themselves from the authority, I'm not an attorney and I don't play one, so, you know, I would suggest that we get an official opinion from your legal counsel. But our general recommendation, based on what I've seen, is that basically the liability that they might be responsible for would be whatever's happened on the airport during their time of involvement in the authority. So, for example, if you possibly had a fuel spill a year ago, and it came back that has to be mitigated, the members of the authority at that point would probably be held responsible to assist in the mitigation of that activity. If a township left the authority, say tomorrow, and then something happened, let's say in August, then it's my opinion, based on what we've seen other places, that, you know, they would then no longer be responsible for whatever's happening at the airport at that point, because they've left the authority. So from a financial responsibility, again, from an FAA perspective, you know, what's been going on to date, if you were to look to close the airport, again, I think you would look towards, you know, what's happened in the time frame since the authority was formed. What kind of dollars has the airport taken from a federal perspective, and that liability might be transferred to the group. Again, we have very little data to go on, because it just doesn't happen. Folks talk about it, we explain the process, and everybody goes, nope, okay, we're happy owning an airport. Because usually the dollar figure is going to be way more than they're expecting. So that's kind of the highlights for the closure issue. I guess before I go on to the other three, I guess, is there any questions on that? Or something else you're looking for us to identify for you?
Any questions here? Any questions up in the circuit court?
I'm not seeing any questions at this time.
Not time? Hold on.
Go ahead, Sam.
Did you take a look at I've never seen the bylaws of the airport, but did you take a look at the bylaws for an entity? My understanding is this all stemmed from some entities wanting to get out, not participate anymore. So we have bylaws apparently that, does it say anything in these bylaws about an entity wanting to get out?
No, not really. And it really doesn't even say specifically defined amounts of contribution either. You know, every authority that we've worked with has formed a little differently. So, I know, for example, in Carroll, they have an authority that started with nearly a dozen members, and they're down now to only 4, and of those 4, only 1 is actually paying. So the 4 members are still part of the authority because they can't get out, because one of their caveats of their bylaws is they have to be paid in full. So 2 of them have not paid in over a decade. So for them to go back and make that kind of a payment, they're not interested in doing. So they still have a seat at the table, still have voting rights, but have not made payments to the authority in quite some time. So because they can't pay their way out, they then can't be released from the authority.
Now these,
They're-
the bylaws you found, that's going to be part of the report.
We have them. I mean, we have them. Yeah.
Yep.
But in the original bylaws, then there was really no one township pays percentage, one township pays that percentage. The county pays so much. It was never broke down like that at all in the original operation of this.
Not in the original version that I have. It was the copy that I've got 2 different versions. I've got an original, and I've got one that I believe was about a year later that did references a different dollar amount for a couple of the townships.
Stephanie, yeah, that's really helpful, because I think, one of, really what kind of drove part of this whole conversation was, as you're aware, some of the townships wanting to withdraw. And then the question of, because in fact, since the authority has been formed, we have undertaken some significant paving projects, grant projects, we got a lot of federal money. I don't know if we've done anything that would incur liability from a, other standpoint, but I think that was one of the things that we were wondering about, because, if in fact, and it sounds like there's an expectation that we can't just pull the plug if we wanted to do that, that we would have to pay back in, who's going to be left holding the bag? It can be like a game of musical chairs where, right, well, everybody, we'll leave the last person in there. On the other hand, what you're also telling us is, and again, our intention was never to close the airport. It was really just to look at, for the parties that wanted to get out of the airport authority, because again, nobody's got a crystal ball, or otherwise you would have taken all your money out of the stock market a week ago. But in the event of something, what do we do with these entities? But it seems what you're saying is, we're probably never going to be at the point where, from a financial standpoint, if, for example, if our operational expenses in terms of our public contributions under $70,000 a year, it's not going to make, the numbers aren't going to make sense for us to even undertake the study to close the airport, even if we wanted to close the airport. Is that kind of what you're telling us?
Quite honestly, yes. I mean, thanks for reading between the lines. The process itself.
That's important information, right?
As an example. The environmental assessment alone is probably in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $400,000.
Yeah, for all that property, sure. Okay. Because that's helpful. I mean, now, and then I guess the other thing is would one option be for the parties, and we'd have to look at the whole funding thing, but the entities the townships that wanted to withdraw, and I don't want to speak for those townships, but the impression I got was the issue wasn't that they didn't support the airport necessarily. They didn't feel like they should be contributing. And so in theory, they could remain part of the authority and not contribute. And then nothing would change in terms of, who has any obligation, because as you pointed out, when we first looked at this, this is Tim, I'm the airport authority. Because of the way the bylaws were put together, if we ever even tried to assign some type of cost, or, I don't even know how you do it, because we funded this thing by kind of passing the hat around to municipalities and people kicked in. So push came to shove and to start paying back money, would we do it based on the initial contribution? Would we do it based on the population of the entity? I mean, we have nothing, we have nothing concrete to go on. And so it seems like given us some pretty clear information that helps us go forward.
I have something.
And Tim, just to,
Okay, I'm Commissioner Bunting. I'm doing my spring cleaning, and as I was doing it, I ran across a book that had, well, it was back in 2002, that has all of our departments in it. And I come across the one on the airport commissioners, or commission, it says. And I didn't get it, I just found this early this morning, so I've not had a chance to really read it. And basically, there's only one page here. But, and this is my understanding to begin with, that many years ago, when they moved the airport, the county took over part of it, and Alma took a small portion of it. And then when the county became into financial problems, that's when we formed an authority. And there was, one of it was Pine River and one of it was Arcata. And I believe the cities was all going to put in some extra money to help us get through the hard times. And so basically, if there's anybody who would like to read this, especially from the airport or from here.
Give it to Tracy and we'll see that she gets.
Yeah, if we could get some copies, I'd like to keep this copy.
Yeah.
It got wet because I had a drink in there, but it mostly in there, there's only one page, but it talks about that the county, it's the county and
Back then, it was
county airport.
Yep, and it was
And we're the
county and the city.
we're the 100% sole responsible for the airport, us, and I think, and I didn't get a chance to really proofread that again, but I believe there's a small portion of it that belonged to Alma.
Yes. In fact, if you look at the plat, it's still platted. Some of it belongs to the city of Alma and some of it is the county. It's actually multiple.
Well, another issue I wanted to bring up too is this, is that the county pays a certain amount of money for operation or to the authority. And when the townships or the cities are paying, that's a double whammy because they already pay taxes to the county and then they turn around and take their taxes. So the county's paying out there and they're paying. And actually, so it's a double whammy of taxes. And that's where the issue came up. Now the county is sitting financially stable and we should take that back and finish.
And then, and eventually, I hope that that can happen. We've got a lot of things to find out before we can make some rational decisions on how to go forward. Stephanie, in a moment, is going to continue on with the report. The only thing I would like to say is that I don't think it's, I know it's never been the intent of this commission to try to close the airport. But you cannot make financial decisions just based on we're going to go forward. We've got entities that wanted to get rid of the airport. This report will definitely state we can't afford to get rid of the airport. There's no way in the green earth that we can do that. We must move forward, and we must move forward in the best manner possible. And so that's why we are very careful on what we say and what we do. And this report is going to definitely, and when we get it written, and Stephanie's talking about it now, but it'll be in written form for everybody to see that it's impossible. You're not going to close this.
Which we didn't know, which we none of us really knew that. I mean, if you look at the cost of the studies we'd have to do, plus what we owe to the feds, and you bonded that, it'd probably be cheaper just to continue to make, it would be definitely be cheaper to continue to make your contribution.
One of the things, one of the issues that I have today is that it's almost going to be a year and we need to at least give our portion of the money to the airport so they can still.
Portion.
We did.
No, I thought we only paid 20,000.
$27,000.
Which is what our contribution.
Okay, I thought it was 20,000. Okay.
27,000?
26. And we always make our payments.
Yeah. So that's done. But
That's never been an issue.
hopefully, and maybe Stephanie can, after she continues here, can allude to the fact about how much longer she thinks this report's going to take her so that so she can come back, present the whole report, and then we can start our work.
Right, that would be a question I have.
So, Stephanie?
Somebody poke Stephanie.
All right.
All right, ready to go.
Great. Well, okay. Well, great questions. And Tim made a comment I just want to follow up on. that was very true, and that I reached out and talked to well over a dozen different folks affiliated with either with the airport, with the members of the authority, with the county, the EDC group, and so had a great conversation, and not one of them was of the opinion that the airport needed to close. So just as a follow-up to that, it was more about, and especially as it related to the funding, of maybe there was a better way to fund it than some of the townships being involved. So I just wanted to streamline that, or make note that that was a common theme, that there wasn't anybody that I talked to that said, you know, this facility is not necessary, that it needs to go away. So the closure side, again, and I do commend you for asking us to look at that, because quite honestly, that is a question we get a lot from a number of our clients of what would it take, why should we keep an airport? And so I think as you look forward, it is an important piece of information for you to have as you're making decisions. When we look at that, so assuming that we, and we'll put some dollar figures to that, to some of the items that we know, for example, what we think it would take to do the environmental review and things like that, with some caveats to give you some frame of reference. When we then look forward to, okay, so let's assume we're going to keep the airport. How do we make it bigger, better, faster, stronger? How do we make it operate more efficiently? And as I mentioned in my opening comments, you know, the three issues that we're kind of looking at are, you know, more efficient operation of the airport. How do we look at more increased revenues, so that more that we generate on the airport, hopefully then we could reduce the amount of municipal contributions, and then overall management. And we discussed, one of my staff members that's working on this project with me, we discussed that this is almost like a 3D matrix, because you change one element under efficiency, well, that might help revenues. We change one element in management, it might affect this. And so there's a number of moving parts. And so what we're going to try to do in the report is capture some of these elements individually, to help explain what we're seeing is happening at the airport and where we think certain improvements might be able to be realized. But coupled with that is then how do some of them dovetail, and in some cases they may not, it may provide, as an example, more efficiency and better management, but that might come at a cost. So I think there will be some decision making that the authority will need to make moving forward in terms of what do we want the airport to be when we grow up. And I don't say that you know, tongue in cheek. It's more of the airport as it functions today, and this is based upon looking at what's happening from the operational logs. We've gone and looked at some of the flight pattern information from the FAA. Is that, you know, the airport is really somewhat overbuilt for the level of activity that you have coming into the airport today. And you are not alone. There are many airports in a similar situation with a 5,000-foot primary, you know, a comparable, in your case, a 3,200-foot crosswind runway, that if we had to build that facility today, we would not be able to justify doing that. So that's a challenge in that, you know, you do have a facility that on a day-to-day operation, you don't necessarily have the level of activity that, you know, is going to generate a positive revenue for many instances there. And what I mean by that is, you know, you don't have the corporate traffic that some of your neighbors do. You know, as an example, Mount Pleasant to the north, they see a considerable greater amount of jet traffic coming in and out, a lot of it having to do with the casino, but also a number of the businesses in the community. And so they have only a single paved runway at 5,000 feet, a turf crosswind. So they've got less infrastructure to maintain. They've got more corporate activity coming to the airport. But they also expend more because of the way they staff it, because they have that activity. So there's some soul searching, I'll call it, of, what do you want the airport to be? If it's to continue to serve the general aviation pilots, and by that I mean the smaller single and twin engine aircraft that you have, not necessarily the jet type of aircraft that could come in on a 5,000-foot runway. There's a little bit of a different mentality about what you need in terms of services and activity at the airport compared to what you might want to look at if you wanted to try to target more of the corporate activity. The challenge being it's not just about what's the runway length. You need to have the businesses in the community that draw that corporate traffic. We need to have a terminal building that is comfortable, that has the amenities in it so that a corporate pilot is going to want to hang out for several hours or possibly all day at the facility, or have ability to get into town to grab a bite to eat. Those types of things. So there's more to it than just looking at how do we, A, maintain the pavements, B, there's a number of service activities that then can influence or affect what we bring in terms of activity at the airport. And so that kind of plays into the staffing or management side of it. Some of the observations we have today is that if I could focus on fuel as an example, I'll try not to bounce around too much, but my goal is to give you some samples of things that we're looking at, some of the things that we've identified that might be areas you want to improve on. The fuel is one of them. We know that right now the current fuel farm is owned by your fixed base operator, McDonald Air Service. The challenge with that is that you are getting very minimal revenue. We would call that a fuel flowage fee from McDonald for having the fuel. So they pump the fuel, they buy the fuel, and you get about $4,000 a year from them because they're putting fuel through their fuel farm. As you're probably aware, their fuel farm is, for the 100 low lead fuel is not operating correctly right now, and so they are having to fuel the airplanes out of trucks. Not exactly inefficient operations. That costs more for the per load for the major fuel dumps because they can't bring a full truck in. They have to bring a partial truck because we're only filling the small stationary trucks. So anyway, that's an issue right now, that there's a low revenue. I know that you have planned in your CIP, I believe it's under design this year and construction next year, of a federally funded fuel farm, which then the county or the authority will take ownership of. That's an opportunity for the county or the authority to consider how are they then going to manage that. You could say, well, we now own it, but we're going to turn over all operation back to the FBO and let them continue.
Oops.
Uh-oh.
Neighbors. Free connection. Hold on.
Heard a call back.
I got it. Technology.
Sounds like he's aware of it though.
Yeah, he's working on it. He's working on it.
Just waiting for her to call back in.
Yeah.
Might not know, she don't know.
It's like the good news, bad news. It's the good news.
Hi there. Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
I'm not used to working from home, and the cat just took a walk across my keyboard and hit the hang up button. My apologies. Note to self, next call, she gets locked out of the room. So I think I was talking about the fuel farm.
Right.
Yes.
So, and as an example of that, so once the new fuel farm is in place, one of the considerations will be, do you turn the operation and the fueling and the maintenance of it back over to the FBO and then still, only receive your $4,000 a year, or do you work out some other type of an agreement because you now own the fuel farm? One of the suggestions we have is that you might want to consider, is it a authority staff member which, you know, could be a county rep or maybe a city employee. Tracy and I were discussing what some staffing options might look like, who would be there more on a routine basis to do that. Currently, you know, the FBO is not staffed full 8 to 5. So you do have some activity that we're expecting you to lose in terms of fuel sales because there's call outs required. And what I mean by that is when the airport's doesn't have a body there to handle the fueling, aircraft have to put a phone call in to call somebody out to then fuel the aircraft. Corporate aircraft really don't like to do that because that's time that they've got to plan and they've got to wait. They don't know if you're going to be there in 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour to do that. And so do you know, in talking to the folks up at Mount Pleasant, that they have seen an increase in their fuel sales because of the fueling activity at Elma right now. That there are pilots who are coming up to Mount Pleasant to get fuel because either they don't want to pay the or wait for the call out compared to being able to fuel it themselves. So I'm not sure if you're planning for a credit card reader on the fuel farm, but I assume you are, in which case then aircraft will be able to fuel themselves, but then you still have the option with the more corporate style aircraft that though they typically aren't a big fan of fueling their own airplane, they're looking for somebody to do that. So I think there's some opportunity there, and that's one of the scenarios that we have started to formulate of what might a situation look like there if the authority takes on responsibility with that, both for the fueling, but then also as a body that might be there more routinely to handle some of the day-to-day activities that right now you're paying the FBO to handle. You know, some of your peers, as an example, you know, all of your current services that you are utilizing in terms of snow plowing, lawn mowing, and general staffing, both the fuel sales and then just being generally around the airport as the airport manager, are all being done by others. The 3 peer airports that we talked to that were kind enough to respond to our requests for information to give us a comparison, all 3 of them are currently operated by the municipalities themselves. So they don't operate with an FBO situation like what you currently are. You know, City of Mount Pleasant, they're staffing that with a full-time airport manager and then 2 part-time staff members. Mason Airport, which we looked at, and it's not the same in terms of physical infrastructure, but they do have a very large number of general aviation aircraft, so we felt that was a comparable fleet mix comparison. They have one part-time 30-hour employee that handles most of the day-to-day activity at the airport, except for fueling. They only have a credit card reader that is available, so they have nobody there actually fueling. And then Big Rapids, who has, again, all the functionality is handled now by the City of Big Rapids. That's just transitioned in the past, I think, 3 years it is, since their former FBO their main point of contact airport manager unfortunately passed away. So they decided instead of going out for a new FBO, they they brought those services back into the city. And so they have a their emergency service coordinator is now also the manager, and then they have 2 part-time staff members. So that's how they're all doing it with a little different twist. You know, you've got quite a bit of activity happening across between McDonald Air, the EAA, and what's happening with the City of Elma with Eric handling a lot of your admin, your finance activities, and then also your basic maintenance on some of the buildings through the DPW department. So you've got it spread out across a number of entities and bodies that, you know, from an efficiency and that management standpoint, certainly gave us some pause. It was very difficult for us to get information about who was doing what, not that they weren't forthcoming in it. It was just there was a lot of people, everybody had a little nugget, and so you really, it became difficult to try to find the complete package, if you will, of information we were looking for because it was spread across quite a wide array of folks. That's, I think, one of our recommendations is that you try to streamline that aspect of the operation as best you can to help with that. We do anticipate, though, that could be one of the areas that possibly could increase that cost, though. If you look at staffing a single body, who's going to help with the fuel sales. That person could also handle lawn mowing. That's what the other airports do. Could also do some of the basic snow plowing. That's what the other airports do. So that person's not just sitting around in the terminal building twiddling their thumbs waiting for an airplane to pop in and request fuel. They're out doing other activities around the airport that could remove some of these other costs that you have. The challenge is, when it's not subcontracted out like it currently is today, it's probably going to be at a little higher cost because you're looking at a city or a county employee with benefits, et cetera, that jump that cost up. So those are some of the items, and I'll call them the highlights of things that we've identified that we definitely see as being some areas for improvement that we could look at. And some of it, again, has to do with, what level of service do you want to have for the airport? Because there are some areas that if you wanted to say we do want to attract some of that activity, we do think you're going to need to step some of that up a bit. If you say we're okay with where we are today, then some of the way that you operate today is probably okay. And quite honestly, when we compare those three airports that I mentioned, Mount Pleasant, Mason, and Big Rapids, you currently are pulling off maintaining a 5,000-foot runway and a 3,200-foot runway, and the amount of hangars that you have on what I would call close to a shoestring budget, that you're doing that and it's not at a loss. Two of the other airports, as a general rule, are operating where they do need contributions of much higher dollar amount from the county and are operating at a bit of a loss, although their activities in general, if we look at it from the economic impact to their communities, certainly offsets the difference. And then Big Rapids, they're kind of an anomaly for us in that not only they do get a contribution from the city to offset their costs, but they are still then able to operate in the black and could probably even turn some of that money back that the county or the city is contributing to the overall activity. I think the one thing that concerns us a little bit in looking at your numbers is just the amount of capital improvements that we're anticipating you're going to need. I'm assuming that Prine and Newhoff has been discussing that with either the authority board or at a minimum Eric, that you've got some rehab projects coming up in the very near future in terms of your runway pavements and things that starting to plan and program for those are going to be critical. Because those, you're going to have a 5% local match to those projects when the time comes. So with that, like I said, our goal is to try to discuss a few of these kind of individually with observations of what we've seen, how you might want to address them. And then we're looking at a couple different scenarios where we say, well, if you do A from the efficiency side, B from the management side, and C from the revenue side, here's what we think be able to happen and how that would possibly play out. Obviously, there's a number of caveats to that because we don't know what the fuel prices are going to be. We don't know that if you staff the fueling from 8 to 6, can you automatically assume that we're going to increase the amount of gallons we sell by 100 gallons or 200 gallons? We just don't know because we don't have that kind of level of detailed information of what your fuel sales were prior to the tanks becoming an issue in terms of those different types of activities. It's kind of, you don't know what you don't know because they were, if they're not coming in, how do we know they weren't coming in? We deal with that a lot when we do runway extension projects of, if we've got a 5,000-foot runway, but their aircraft need 6,000 feet, well, they're not coming anyway, so how would we even know that? So those are some of the elements that we're looking at. Like I say, overall, I think you could move forward with it the way it is. The airport is not broken, I guess is the key takeaway. We think there's some things that you could do to certainly make it shine a little better.
Okay. Questions?
Not seeing any questions up here.
I bored you all to sleep, huh?
No, it's a lot of good information.
Well, you've given us a lot of information, Stephanie, and that's great. And it's been tough, I know. You've had scheduling issues. Now we've got this new normal that we're living under. Do you have a timeline on when you think you're going to be able to finish your report in written form?
I've talked with my other staff member, and I apologize. He was down with the flu for almost 2 solid weeks, and he wanted it clearly noted it was pre-virus, so it was just the flu. He's been very adamant to make sure that was known. We've discussed that we would like to have something draft within the next 30 days.
That'd be good.
You know, we've got some stuff developed. I really wanted, after Tracy and I discussed this call or this meeting, to see if there's anything specific that you heard that you liked or didn't like that you'd like us to focus on more, and then we could try to focus on some of those if there was something else.
The group that's sitting here, her report that she had just given us verbally, is there anything else that you think we need to look at within this scope? Well, if you do, just.
One minor little correction
Go ahead.
regarding the fuel farm. And that is, we buy our fuel from AdFuel out of Ann Arbor, and they deliver anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 gallons at a time, depending on what the price is and what our needs are. And they usually try and combine a truckload with another facility, another airport, so that we can share the
Transport costs, yeah.
Excuse me. The one thing in Stephanie's report that I wasn't sure she was clear on was that we don't get delivery of that fuel directly into the fuel truck. That we just, that's the fuel. We still have a 12,000 gallon fuel tank that we have a pump system where we pump from the 12,000 gallon tank into the truck. That is what, 800 or 900 gallon tank, whatever it is, something like that. So, you know, we might have to pump once every 2 weeks, or depending on the summertime, probably once a week or something along that line, into the fuel truck, but we still buy in bulk. Okay, that's the point I want to make.
Did you hear that, Stephanie?
I did. Thank you for that clarification. I did not get that out of our conversation, so thanks for that. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Also, Daryl, she was asking, do you have any records back that you could use for projection of when you had the fuel system set up better?
We provided that information to Stephanie in a report. The last report that we gave to the airport authority has all that detailed information since 2014, I think.
Do you know if your records go back to 2014, Steph?
I do have that. I guess I apologize. What I don't have is that unknown of who are we missing. You know, with, you know, for example, the FBO right now, if you pull up the directory, it says that after 2 o'clock, you need to call for service. So our concern is that you're going to have potential users who are going to pull that up. They're going to see that, oh, you've got fuel, but we have to do a call out after 2 o'clock. So what fuel sales are you potentially losing, and or operations in general that might go somewhere else because of it? That's the part I don't have a number to.
Well, I can address that a little bit. We do have the credit card system before we lost the 100 bullet. So we still have the credit card system for the Jet A, but there is sales associated with lost sales because of, you know, we don't staff it on Sunday. 17% of our sales were on Sunday. Prior to that, we have sales that through the credit card system prior was after midnight, after 5 o'clock. I mean, we have all that data. So we know exactly what we're losing. We probably lost 20,000 in sales last year because of that. So, and that's why fuel farm is kind of an important issue. MDO for the airport. We do have, credit card systems there, and they'll allow people to do it anytime.
So it sounds like you have data that we could project
Oh,
from.
we have all
Yeah.
kinds of that.
All right.
Does she have that?
And
data?
I guess if that was Daryl, if we could get that, that would be great, because we don't have that breakdown. You just gave us total sales.
That was Dennis.
Yeah, we gave you a number of, that report that we gave, the airport report, last February, has it by gallons sold, and it also has it by number of transactions. So I think you have that report.
But she probably doesn't have the actual time, kind of what you just explained, like Sundays, which makes sense to me, because hey, Sunday, if it's a nice day and people are off work, you go fly. So Sundays.
Would it be helpful if you wrote something up and sent that to her, maybe?
Well, yeah, depending on what she wants, I have all kinds of data. I can show you.
Well, if we can fill in the blanks just a little bit there, if you can help, that'd be great.
Stephanie, I don't know, in this, if you just don't know, you just say, I don't know, but one of the things from an economic development standpoint we've talked about, there is not a conference center hotel outside of Mount Pleasant within the radius of the airport. And, when you talk about the staffing, what I'm hearing is, well, the corporate people don't want to fill their own plane, which I kind of had to smile when I heard that, because hey, if I got a jet, if I can afford a jet,
Right.
I'm not going to get, I'm not going to get gas on my Gucci loafers, filling up my plane, somebody else is going to do that for me. So I completely understand that. But just from what you know about airports, because we, it's like a chicken and an egg thing. We've talked about, well, geez, if we could get a hotel, a conference center hotel, that would generate more airport business. Is that sound reasoning, or is that not really? Is that more pie in the sky hopes? Because it seems like from the staffing standpoint, that's where kind of the cost is, because I'm assuming that our local users are content to use the credit card system once we got it fired back up, right?
Right.
But it's this idea that for corporate, for corporate customers, they need service. And so if we, would that help? If tomorrow somebody built a conference center hotel on the Highway 46 and 127, do you think our airport business would tick up?
Yes. Yeah, no question. Yes.
It sure wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, they're flying now. They order rental cars from Mount Pleasant and
Can go up.
back to Mount Pleasant to stay
Right.
at facilities. So yeah,
I thought so. You guys think so, but I wanted to hear from her because she's the expert. Okay, thank you.
This was pretty nice.
Pardon?
I thought Mike Pung's
Yeah,
place.
and the challenge you have is, those kind of folks, and I don't mean any disrespect to any of your local, more, mom and pop shops, those types of folks that are coming in are often coming in, corporate travel. So they're looking for chain hotels. They're looking for more high end. I mean, the comment that was made, that Mount Pleasant is a client of ours. And so Bill Brickner and I chat quite a bit. And, his comment is, yeah, we get requests, and often I'll get a rental car up here that's supposed to be in Elma because they deliver it out here instead. So it certainly is an issue. Is that going to, if you suddenly had a Holiday Inn Express, appear, is that going to change the dynamic of the airport overnight? No. It's an element that certainly contributes to it. Folks who want to come to Gratiot County, if they need to do business, if it's a quick in and out trip, I'm going to guess that they're planning to come into the airport. And quite often I'm guessing is that they're, whoever they're meeting with is, going to pick them up so that, rental cars aren't an issue. If you're looking at, a more extended term, then it certainly starts to work against you because the hotel stock is more closely lined up to Mount Pleasant. The rental car activity, like I said, Mead and Hunt had a company airplane. We just recently sold it because our pilot went back to being a bush pilot in Alaska. Hard to compete with that. You know, it was interesting for us to see exactly how that mentality plays out of where you need to get to. That, you know, they want to be comfortable while they're waiting. I'm painting a very bad picture of corporate pilots, but you know, they want to be able to go into places where they can get the fuel serviced correctly. They want to make sure that there's, you know, adequate snow plowing in the wintertime so they can get in and out. They want to have a place that they're going to be able to get good weather briefings, again, be comfortable while they're waiting and or be able to get into town. So all those things, unfortunately, are more the intangibles that you have to make a you know, the destination attractive, and that goes above and beyond, is there a reason they're going there to begin with? So, you know, I just don't know. I struggle to recommend too many different changes because I just don't have a good feel on what's the corporate destination attractiveness of Gratiot County for that type of activity.
Good. Thank you.
You know, I talked with, I think it was, is it Jim? I'm apologize on the,
Yeah,
with Greater Gratiot, yeah. And, you know, we talked about activity and folks who are coming in and you know, you don't even get on the radar for a lot of businesses if you don't have an airport. You know, that's definitely in, you know, the top, you know, at a minimum, the top 10, quite honestly, it's usually in the top 5 of activity, you know, looking for corporate locations. But then it's a matter of, are they really going to embrace it and or use it?
Right?
So Stephanie, I'm just wondering, in this final report, will we have kind of an idea of what the airport takes in and what really the minimum expense it is? I mean, will we have maybe a plan if we put a person out there full-time or a person in the AF? Will we have some of that kind of numbers to say, this is a way to look at that, or to try to run it like we're running it now, or with just part-time folks? Or how will this final report kind of look? And I know it really is all
that's
based
kind of our
core business.
Sure. Our goal right now is we have done up a comparison of how you're operating today using the current 2019 budget of what was spent in 2019, and then compared it to your those 3 peer airports to give you an idea of where do you fit relative to some of your peers, and then what we're looking at doing is, based upon some of these different scenarios, giving you our to some degree our best guess. As an example, if you went to a full-time staffed body instead of using the FBO, there's a cost with that, obviously, in terms of that body. And then coupled with it, because right now the FBO is providing all the equipment. So there would be equipment costs affiliated with that we would need to look at. You know, how do we get a snow plow? How do we get the lawn mowing equipment if they were going to mow the lawn compared to the EAA? So those are things that we would be looking at, and what we'll use is current bid rates that we've seen across other airports across the state using federal projects to give you an idea. My guess is that's going to be high because you're probably going to might not go through a federal program, so you don't have Davis-Bacon and all that good stuff. That you could get it probably cheaper. You know, probably get fully outfitted from Bader and Sons and call it a day. So those kind of things we'll definitely be trying to identify for you, that it's not just, hey, great, we hire a guy or gal and put them out at the airport and life's great. No, there's some extra items that come with it. And quite honestly, that's why we're a little bit concerned about going down potentially that route, because there are some definite expenses with it just beyond the staffing side. And some of them also, like I said, have some, you know, what if scenarios with it that will give you some examples as well. One of them is looking at possibly increasing revenue if you were to look at changing up some of the lease rates. You know, most of them are pretty good leases right now in terms of benefiting the tenants, not necessarily the airport. So there is some room there that if you made some small incremental increases on an annual basis instead of every 5, which is how the current leases are written, you know, there's some opportunities to generate a little bit additional revenue. So we're looking at a few of those things as well.
So will we have some comparisons on lease rates from these other airports to what we're doing or whatever? We'll have that in the report.
Yep, we've got some from them. Yep. And I'll tell you, I'll warn you right now with that, it's hard to talk apples to apples. As I told Tracy when we first started talking about this project, one of our favorite sayings in this industry is, if you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. It's because they all operate in their own little ways. They've all got their own nuances. Lease rates are similar. You know, if I call Big Rapids and say, well, tell me what's your current box hanger rate, so I can compare that to what's happening in Elma. It's going to be all over the board, because it's going to be a question of, well, how big is it? Is it privately owned, or is it the land, or with a land lease, or does the airport own it and do they lease it out? Does it have electricity? Does it have sewer, water, gas? You know, so it's fairly challenging for us to put a, you know, apples to apples comparison, but we will certainly give you as much information as we can to make an informed decision.
Any other questions? Well, Stephanie, I just appreciate you taking your time to talk to us tonight. We'll be looking forward to your report, and I'm sure that you and Tracy will be talking in the meantime. Is there anything else from anybody else? Okay. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yep, thanks. Appreciate it.
Have a good evening.
No.
Oh,
Thank you for your time.
we're done, and I appreciate you coming in.
That is Sandy for me, Daryl.
Okay. That concludes that report. Back to my agenda here. We're at, we're going to talk about, let's see, permits department.
That's perfect. When I first arrived, I looked at a variety of operations, and there were a number of things that I thought need to be configured, and some of them happened kind of organically. And the permits department is really the last, and we've been putting the puzzle pieces in place for really a couple of years. There are some things we've been doing. This issue was on the agenda at the last meeting. We ended up setting it over because everyone was pretty tired by the time we got to it. There was an opportunity for you to do the memo then, and then again prior to this meeting. And I hope that in the meeting, or in the memo, I was able to say everything that you need to know. But what I'm wanting to do is to create the full-time building official position that we haven't had for a couple of years. Dale Sherman has been helping us out by working part-time as a building official, and that's required essentially. We've had a building inspector, and then we've had Bill Leonard doing zoning and soil erosion, and we've had administrative support. We're now at the point where we've had a turnover in administrative support. We have an individual up there that is now a month away from being qualified to be a building official. And you may remember from a couple of years ago, these are not a dime a dozen. And in fact, we're hard pressed to find building officials that are looking for work in the state of Michigan. So we've been kind of growing our own. The other thing that we have going is we've been talking with the townships about doing some blight enforcement. And it looks as though at least for a year, we're going to have a pilot program. We're going to have about, it looks like 4 participants. And we've been indicating that there would be staff here to do that. So what I'm looking for is the position authority for building official, although there used to be one, so there technically is, but there's a salary I have attached to it. The other thing, and I'm not speaking in order just because it's been that kind of night, but the other important thing about this building official is it will offer supervision and oversight. It will be the department head over the buildings and grounds department. And that's very important. You don't need your county administrator to be the department head over your buildings and grounds department. It's a lot of fun and really interesting, but really I ought not be doing that. So a building official is going to have experience, and one of the requirements for becoming a building official is that you have X number of years. I think it's a minimum of 5 years as a contractor So, that dovetails very nicely in working with buildings and grounds. And in fact, Tony Miller has been really overseeing the project there at the South Annex and all the work that we're doing there. To get this department where I think it needs to be for the remainder of this year, it would cost the 14,000, got it here somewhere. It is the $14,196, and that's general fund money. Remember that all of these positions are funded through fees. So it's just not a fiscal issue for you for the most part. However, by having the building official overseeing the buildings and grounds department, that's a general funded department. So we cannot use the fees from permit and building inspections or soil erosion or zoning to pay for that. So that would be a 0.30 part, a third of position of this department head building official and out of general. So I in all the costing, I mean, this is kind of complicated, but we wanted to make it right. You have people who worked this way up until that date and then would work another way as of that date. So it's a little bit confusing. That's why I'm actually glad you had a little extra time to review it. But the bottom line for now is it would be that additional $14,196. So that's one thing I'm asking you for. I'm asking you for the building official position that also is department head over buildings and grounds. And then the final position authority I'm asking you for is another inspector. I think I've laid out in the memo how we would be utilizing that person and my commitment to you. And we did it this way with procurement also. My commitment to you is that I'm not going to start that at 0.75 FTE, even though I'm asking you for the authority for that. I would start that at 0.5, and I would only grow it if I needed to. Again, all those costs, it's costed out at 0.75 FTE, and that's there. But this provides us proper oversight of the department. It sets us up if we want to grow. There's been discussion about taking back some of the other inspection functions, mechanical, electrical. So again, we would have the supervision oversight all set for that as well. This gives us bench depth. We have everyone getting cross-trained. These are the final pieces.
Tony Miller would be the head of it.
Well, I'd have to post the position.
Well, I mean, but, okay, but just, we'd have one, and then we would have like, Dale would still, or that, we'd have that continue, is she gonna wrap up?
Dale would wrap up.
He'll wrap up there for Tony gets licensed or whatever.
Dale would wrap up as of the 30th of April, and we would look to make I'm asking, and the way we've run the numbers is that the new building official would take over as of May 1.
But Dale has been working very sparsely since this all happened. We don't want him around this.
Well, when we're done, and I'll come back to you though, when, once it's all figured out here in terms of the staffing, I want to bring him in safely, of course, and have him crown him king, because he really bailed us out on this and allowed us to continue to function. So he's our hero.
Okay.
Do you want this as 3 separate motions, or do you want it as a single motion? Because they kind of go together, but they're kind of separate.
Well, of course, I want you to approve it all, and thus I want you to do it in the way that pleases you the most.
Whichever easiest to you, but 2 would be good.
Because you need the money to pay the position.
Yep.
All right, so I'll move to authorize a budget amendment of up to $14,196 from the fund balance to fund the general fund portion of the department head compensation for the remainder of fiscal year 2019-2020.
I'll support
Or any more discussion?
Can't hire somebody if we don't got the money.
Roll.
Yeah, I was gonna say roll call.
No money was coming, you should be ready.
The names are the same out here.
She makes that job look so easy, doesn't it?
It's like I gotta look around and see who's out here.
I'm just teasing you.
Murphy,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Bunting,
Yes.
Everett,
Yes.
Bailey.
Very good. Next.
Yeah, move to authorize the position of building official permits in Buildings and Grounds Department at a total rate of compensation of $87,567 as of May 1st, 2020.
There's another position, so maybe you're going to do 3.
Yep, yeah, I'm gonna do 3.
Okay.
So moved.
Move supported. Clerk call the roll. Oh, is there any other discussion? I'm sorry.
Nope.
Ask clerk call the roll.
Wake up. I'm just kidding.
Unless you got a tablet.
Commissioner
Yes.
Bunting,
Her computer went into sleep mode.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Commissioner Bunting,
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Commissioner Lambert,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Bailey.
Yes. And the third one?
Now I'll move to authorize an enforcement officer position at up to 0.75 FTE at a rate of $17 per hour to be paid from fees for service.
Or
Any other discussion? Hearing none, ask the clerk to call the roll when she gets time.
You don't want her to walk away from you.
No, I know. She's elected to take her stuff and put it in the corner.
Smart.
Why am I in here? Commissioner Lambert,
Yes, she needs a sneeze guard over there.
yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Commissioner Bunting,
Yes.
Commissioner Bailey.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
All right.
We're going to start.
I got a quick question. So with this blight, what are you looking at the townships paying? What do you have for? I mean, you looking at splitting that 17 grand up?
The variables have been how many townships would participate and be paying in, and then based on how many townships there are, how much FTE is required. So I don't remember the figure now because it's been moving around a little bit. I want to say it's $4,100 per township per year.
And
Because we got it down.
stress again, this is a pilot project. We've had these 4 townships specifically begging us to help them. And I think we need to help them best we can. So this is one of the.
You say what for you?
Yeah.
I could, except that's a memory question. I can tell you that Elba really got this thing going. Fulton is in, I can't remember the other. two.
North Star.
North Star.
And
John Hartman's,
Is Bethany in there?
no.
Jerry backed out?
What I will, Mike,
I can-
email you the full.
With all the stuff, other stuff going in this.
Well,
Well, and I wouldn't be surprised. I know some people are kind of taking a wait and see attitude, and I wouldn't be surprised if we build it, they will come. And if it just doesn't work out and people say that's too much money, then we tried and,
at the risk of talking too much, which of course I always take the risk, but this is, operationally, it's so interesting because with these tools, we have real elasticity too. And with everybody being cross-trained and cross-licensed and certified, except for building official and build, that's a little bit different. But I mean, we can move some of these functions around, which means with the 0.5 or the 0.75, if we have additional townships next year, I think we could do it with this staffing. So this gives us room to expand or contract, and I'm very pleased that you approved this so that we can put together just a great operation here.
Alrighty then, we come to that point of our meeting where we can adjourn this meeting and move into our finance meeting.
so move.
Support.
Supported. And clerk, call it roll. We're piling it on tonight. I'm sorry.
I'm kind of scooching back here. I'm trying to see her.
It's in the dark.
I'm sorry, it's a long meeting, but I didn't know it was going to be. And it's too bad we're all close quarters for this long period of time. I'm going to go out on a limb and say none of us are sick.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Bunting,
Yes.
Commissioner Lambert,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Commissioner Bailey.
Okay, Tim?
Hey, call the Finance Full Board meeting to order. Financial Administrators Report. Chris?
Well, I don't have anything, I'll try to go here for you tonight, cash balances. In particular, while I was preparing for this, I was looking at February 2019's general fund versus February 2020's. And we see there's approximately a $400,000 decrease in what our cash balance was for the general fund. And what we're looking at here is the county purchased a building. The county put a significant amount of resources into refitting this building. And also in October, at the beginning of this fiscal year, the county transferred $225,000 from the general fund to the delinquent tax fund for the first payment.
First payment.
$100,000. So that's why we're seeing approximately $400,000 dip from year. Any questions related to cash balances?
I don't know who I asked. How much money came in from our taxes this year altogether? Isn't it, it's all done at the end of February, right?
Well, there are 2 tax deductions throughout the year, and it's never all done.
No, but I want to know.
Collect them every day. You're asking how much we billed for it?
No, I'm saying like at the end of February, all the taxes are supposed to be on for the second half of last year, right?
Are you asking like what county operating brought in 2019 taxes?
Yeah, yes, that'd be good.
Was it in the audit? I mean, she talked about the money in the audit, and then we had one township that didn't pay in time.
Well, that was the overall tax money coming in, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the fiscal end number.
Yeah.
That's the fiscal end.
That's the number that you, I think, yeah, I wasn't sure what you're asking.
I can't remember the number.
I guess I'm trying to ask like all, okay, say all last year, 2019.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I was just wondering what the last half was. Like how much, huh?
I can get that to you.
Oh, okay, that'd be great. I was just curious.
Checks?
Yeah, without an exact number, it's just a little bit over $7 million.
It was over what?
It's a little over $7 million.
Okay. Just about, I just was curious.
So moving on to
Checks.
check reviews, as typical fashion, we have the checks that are over $10,000 and check register. Any questions? Commissioner Smith, I did prepare some notes.
I'm all set.
What I thought.
I had a couple in there, but I'm all set. I might catch mine off night.
Start out.
So he's gonna say that $49 for that snifter bearing, you know. Now, was that a
Tell me what,
half-inch snifter bearing, or was that a 5/8?
tell me what truck that was.
Harry Township.
Any other questions about the checks? I didn't see anything unusual.
I looked through it. I didn't see anything on it.
On the payment we're making to RESD, the taxes we collected and send to them, what percentage of their budget would you say that, of our money that we send them, that is?
That is not our money.
It's their money that they collect that we distributed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's their millage.
Yeah.
I do not know anything about RESD's budget.
Okay. But we know what we sent them for the year.
Correct.
Okay. If you could get that for me sometime.
And I'm sure it's on the RESD's website.
Is it?
Yeah.
So we collect 100% of that knowledge. None of the townships or cities send that directly to them. I know there are some options.
L1 sends directly to RSD.
which would be the largest collecting unit in the county. So no, I could not tell you 100%.
But the RSD would show it.
That's probably close to
They
half a
should
million
have
dollars.
a report somewhere.
Yeah, they have to have it on.
All right, I was just wondering, and I
Transparency.
see 70,000 to Huntington for interest. What is that?
That is the interest payment on the pension bond. We make
Okay.
2 payments on every bond every year. One is interest only, one is principal plus interest.
Okay.
That's
So it's one of 2 payments for approximately that amount.
the second one would be more in the neighborhood of $600,000.
You bring the principal plus
Well, I have a goofy question or statement, I guess. We're trying to save checks, and I see, did we write RESD 3 checks or just 2 checks? I'm assuming it's 2. The one $835,999.52. And then another one, would that be the 1,300,000?
One was written at the beginning of February 6th, and one was written at the end of February 27th. And when we collect those large amounts of money, like that, it's very important for the RSD to receive them as quick as possible.
Oh, okay.
Because their operations depend on it. And I believe there's also a law that we can hold it for a certain period of time, every 2 weeks. So, yes.
Oh, okay.
And also, we don't have RSD set up on ACH because I don't want a check to be fat fingered and be sent electronically. So any checks that are over, I believe the number right now is $200,000, we automatically have to issue a check because I don't want a $35,000 check to accidentally get entered and issued for $350,000. So
I was going to ask you to explain what fat fingered meant.
so you hit the double zeros.
I've heard that. I've heard it before, but I didn't know if everyone else has.
True.
Yeah.
That is why they receive the checks.
Okay. Any other questions on the check register?
They got to take fat.
Some questions for a change, isn't it?
Okay, Chris, any other things you want to share with us? Otherwise, we'll go on to the treasurer's report.
If you have any questions related to the report that was presented by Ally earlier, we have to take any questions on that. Like she said, we have financial statements, a single audit report, and inside the financial statements is stuff from management letter. For each of the board members, and we usually keep the stockpile of 10 in administration.
for the public.
And that also gets uploaded under financial services in the Gratiot County website. As soon as
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Okay, treasurer's report.
Same 3 reports that I give you every month. Investments, no investing, interest rates are not good.
No, and I think our days of getting 2s are probably long gone now that the Fed funds rate is 0.25. Yeah, so
0 minus 0 to
so those big fat 2% that Michelle got us, well, kiss them goodbye.
It's have to increase it sometime in the future.
I've been saying that for 10 years and
Yeah,
I've
I
been
know.
wrong, so.
So have I.
Yeah, those days I think are gone.
I was just wondering on this report, it's kind of difficult to have that second page with the numbers on the end. Is there any way we can fix it?
Oh,
Yeah, it printed funny. I know what you're saying, Chuck. I did that, but mine just came.
yeah, if the added amount we've been making drops down, it doesn't get to be.
On the investment
Last
report, it just, in our packets, it just, the last line got cut off, and so it made
You
it.
ended up 2 pages.
I'll try to make it smaller.
Yeah, probably have to shrink it or something.
And then the receipt register, about the money that came through our office.
Any questions, Michelle, on that?
There it is.
Nothing, I didn't see anything. Okay, any questions for Michelle? Okay, thanks, Michelle. You know, under other financial business, you know, the only thing I pat this board on the back when we made our, there are certain things we can't control. We can't control how the state invests money in the state retirement account. But when we did our own account, you know, we took the tack of this is more savings than investment. You know, we're putting aside money to spend later as opposed to trying to invest money and get a high rate of return. And, you know, there were options that we could have chosen, you know, such as putting everything in the stock market, which we wisely did not. And, you know, it's one of those interesting things, you know, when it comes to our liability as commissioners, as long as we're acting within our authority, you know, we can't be held liable for making mistakes, you know, so if we just put it in the stock market and, you know, now you know, either the employees, the taxpayers were saying, you know, you guys, you know, you cost us, you owe, and it's like, no, you know, so as long as we're, you know, now when we operate outside of that, when we do things that we're not authorized to do, then we can be sued and lose and
Well,
get,
you know, I see within our retirement accounts, things are gonna fluctuate. All I say is just, it's like your own 401k. Blinders on, don't think about it. We'll revisit it in 6 months and see what we gotta do.
but, you know, I think we were
Nobody reacts overnight.
prudent in our choices.
When's the next time we're gonna have MERS here, or?
We don't normally have them, but maybe once a year unless there's
Okay.
something else going on.
I just, something to think about at some point if we ever wanted to change the mix out of.
Yeah, Chris does a great job of looking at that constantly, and we do have the ability to change that. I think we authorized, I can't remember, you and I, and anyway, we've got a mechanism in place that if we need to make money, we can.
Right, because at some point,
Yeah, we're gonna
buy
buy
an opportunity.
He's watching.
It's
I
you
just told
know,
him, just.
and the thing that I always say is, you know, you can never top and you can never pick the bottom. And, you know, it's funny because I got Kiplinger's financial and I'm thinking I'm just going to cancel the subscription because one of the guys, you know, one of the gurus was talking about oil stocks are looking really good right now. You know, and he was writing, you know, the stuff that he was recommending at 30 is now 4. And it's like, but you know, you can know everything and no, you don't know anything. So we just got to stay the course.
Yeah. There's people who made a lot of money on not knowing anything. They're called hedge funds guys. They make.
When you look at recessions, so governments always respond to them using the same mechanisms to pull you out of a recession. There's always patterns that you can look at. I can tell you that when the U.S., every time the U.S. economy has gone into a recession, the average span from when it hits that 20% drop, it takes a long time for the economy to react to what the federal governments and the state governments are doing to pull it out of it. On average, it takes 100 days from that day that it hits, the market hits 20% down for it to actually bottom out. And 100 days makes sense because all of the businesses report on a quarterly basis. And every quarter is 90 days. So you hit a hard time, then you have 90 days, essentially 180 days of bad financial reports from companies before they start turning around. So there are targets that you can look at when you're aiming to try and move some of your investments around.
Okay.
All right. If there's no other financial business, I move that we return to the regular full board meeting for the purpose of paying the checks. And approving the financial reports. vote. Yeah, that's right. That's my vote. That's my vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. I was looking at George and George is looking at me and it's.
We get confused. We get confused.
That's right. It's,
Okay. Just a few clarifications before, or a statement, I guess, before we adjourn the meeting. We are in some very difficult times, both governmentally, community-wise, you name it, we're in it, all right? The only thing we got is ourselves.
Right.
All right, and if we believe that things are gonna be okay, by golly, they're gonna be okay. But pay attention to your emails and stuff, things are fluid around here. Something might change overnight, we don't know. I do feel that if there's a coronavirus outbreak within this county, then we're gonna have to make other choices. Okay? And we've been discussing those in our emergency management meetings, but just be, like I told staff yesterday, keep your head on a swivel, because you gotta be fluid. We gotta be able to move with it. And once again, Marcus really praised this up because he felt that of all the 3 counties he deals with, we're way ahead. Our management team is way ahead, our board is way ahead of what we need to be doing. So, you have confidence, I have confidence things are gonna be all right. I've got good people, we've got good people surrounding us to make good decisions. So just watch your emails, because if there's something happens, we'll get it out to you so you know what's going on. But like I say, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I really don't, but just be prepared, because it will happen. There's something will happen. The way this going.
According to the news, they're saying in the next couple of weeks, things will really start.
Well, we're in a 15-day period, then there's a reassessment, I think.
And I believe this. What happened in China was a bell curve. If you understand bell curves, they go way up and then they drop off. What the United States is trying to do is to cut that bell curve all the way down about 75%. So all we got is a little bit. And by doing all this, what we're doing tonight, hopefully what you're doing in your lives, we don't shake hands anymore. We don't try to get too close to people anymore.
I believe it's elbow shakes
Yeah, there you go.
or feet.
So anyway.
And it's good advice to use the common, like 1/3 of a cup to a gallon of water and sanitize stuff when you get home, so you don't bring it into your home.
you know, I would just say, I just want to thank George and Tracy and our staff in general. You know, I do think, once again, we've been ahead of the curve on this. You know, it's interesting to read in the other paper, I forget the name of it. But, you know, the headline and the story was Gratiot County declares, you know, an emergency, and here's all the things that they're doing. And then the bottom is like, Isabella County is working on it, you know, because I'm sure they call them and they're, oh yeah, we got to do something. And even the timing of something like that is important, because the sooner you do that, that starts the clock. If down the road we get reimbursed for expenses, you know, there's federal grant funds and things like that, you know, you want to start that clock as early as you can. Plus it just gives people the power to do things. And I just thought, I mean, I know I have a sense of how hard George and our staff worked over the weekend, you know, and I think he just really went above and beyond.
I appreciate that. One of the things that we put out there before anyone else did, but the Center for Disease Control said 50 people. We grabbed onto that, and the governor still had it at 250 people. Guess what she changed it to? 52 people. Now the president's even.
And now it's 10.
It's 10.
So, but there's no mechanism within our government to allow us to do that. So we'll see.
I must, out of arrogance or what, a little bit of pride. Actually, we chose 50, and then the following day we were here from CDC.
Yeah.
Like I said, we're ahead of the curve. And I know Tracy's been sending out regularly things to the staff. In fact, I think Judge Bacher even complimented you on but just kind of keeping everybody informed without panicking and answering people's questions. And like I said, it's nice to be, you know, we're not followers, we're leaders, the way I like to think. In fact, I shared this with George, you know, on a positive note. I know the city manager of Port Huron, and he had posted something on LinkedIn. He had posted picture and a vision. You know, the city of Port Huron has just voted to refinance our pension liability, saving us millions of dollars. And I wrote, I commented, I said, hey, glad you followed Gratiot County's lead, because this is where he got the idea from. I mean,
Is there anything else needs to come for this body?
I just would like to say, if you know, if there's anybody that's needing help, like, it could be anything, I'd be glad to step in and help.
Okay, I'll remember.
I know that one of the big things at the school was babysitters, but I didn't take that one on. I was afraid I'd end up with about 100 kids.
Yesterday, as a resident, I received my PIN code for logging online for the census for Gratiot County.
Okay.
So I just wanted to
yep, I got mine today.
let everybody know that the census is very important for our funding, and also doing it online, obviously, now is much more important than it was.
Yeah, I got mine just today.
I mailed mine in this morning.
Good.
I'll do mine. I keep.
Go, go, go.
I have that.
All right, if there's anything, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
No, just be safe and careful and talk to